This is Kyle Bazzi from Bill Highway. Going to be talking here about one of the most popular topics as it relates to associations and all of your chapters. And that's chapter restructuring. And we're talking about the 10 warning signs that it might be in your future, or maybe we should say in your best interest. So we're going to be walking through those, what those look like, and also what you can do about them. So go ahead and just type in there. Can everybody hear me? If you can type into the question box, give me a Y for yes, an N for no. Want to make sure that the sound's coming through all right. All right. Seems like we got a bunch of new faces in here today. Beth, hey Clarence, what's going on? Claudia, always great to see you. Aaron, Joanne, Mr. John, how's it going, sir? Good to see you back. Megan, it's great to have everybody. Got a lot of new names too that I don't know, so that's awesome. Now I do see some people like Megan with CAE next to their name. Want to make sure everyone knows that you do get CAE credits for this, so we will be sending that out to them at the ASAE. So make sure that you look out for those because you will be able to get them. All right, looks like we got most of the people filled in here, so we're going to get started. My name is Kyle Bazzi. I am the Director of Growth at Bill Highway. And as always, I'd like to share, proud Detroiter. I finally got a new picture up here for you. And Bill Highway is a chapter-based solution for associations. We've been around since 1999. So why are we doing this? Why do we do these bi-weekly webinars for you all? I can promise you one thing, we're not going to be selling you anything. So if you're new here, you can fully expect 0 sales pitches. If you've been here, and I see a lot of you are repeats, you already know that. We're here just to educate. We have over 5,000 chapters and components that we work with in the nonprofit space. So we've just learned so much over the last almost 2 decades, and that's what we're here to do today is to share it. So what I wanted to start with was the impact of not heeding some of these warning signs that we're talking about today as it relates to chapter restructuring. So successful chapter-based associations have strong chapters. Now, I've talked to some of you on this webinar that I see here in our audience today, and I know you're looking at a project either this year or maybe in the years to come for chapter restructuring. So what today's all about is identifying some of those broken links so that you can explore those and then present a case to your staff. Maybe it's your executive staff, or maybe it's also getting some feedback from your chapters, okay? So today we're going to be walking through a lot of those signs, but I'm here to tell you for certain one thing, that if you do not have all of your chapters rowing, so to speak, in the same direction, if the relationship is weak between HQ and your chapter leaders, you are losing out on a ton of revenue, on growth, on non-dues revenue and key activities like event revenue, as well as certain things on the marketing side like brand strength and data. All right, that is a fact. Okay, and we're going to go through a quick example here before we get started on those signs. So as you're presenting this case, show different examples of other associations that have been successful in this transition. It's not easy, but it absolutely is possible, and it absolutely is one of the most impactful things that you can do to realign your chapters with HQ. Now, whatever the reason be that the relationship exists today, maybe it's just always the way that it's been. I hear that answer a lot. The relationship got set up in the 1940s and it just doesn't make sense for our association today. Whatever it is, you can change it. You just have to be able to tell the story on it. So the Association for Corporate Growth, Gary LeBranch, we did a webinar with him a few months ago, and he walked us through what his chapter restructure looked like. And here's some of the stuff that he told us that I want you to extrapolate today. Take down notes, get that webinar, and also use this, present a case to whomever you're talking to at HQ that you got to get buy-in with. So they were looking at rapid and sustained growth, which drove demand for services and resources. Here's some of the problems, though. Operationally, they had a very clubby global board, ineffective management, ineffective systems, and it all stemmed from the federated system of chapters with no agreed upon mission. How many of you are sitting there today that you have HQ strategic objectives, but how many of you, and you can raise your hand if you're in your office, no one's going to see it, how many of you don't know what your chapter strategic objectives are? How many of you, your organizations at HQ have never asked, right? And so when you're in these models, if we don't understand what the chapters want, it's that weak alignment, that weak strategic alignment and mission alignment that really can be a root cause for why no one's working very well together. So those poor personal relationships and distrust and unmet promises create a difficult situation. I was talking to an association yesterday, and he said to me, you know, I just got here, but the way that they did it before was HQ would send out an email saying, hey, we're changing this, never having even gotten input from the chapters or components. And it was like a civil war. They came out with the pitchforks and torches is what he said, because it was like Big Brother was forcing them to do something, and they weren't going to have it. So you got to get on the same team with everybody. And ACG is a great example of what chapter restructuring can do. So they developed a plan. And here's some of the items I want you to write down as you're thinking through a chapter restructure. What are the parts that go into it? You have technology and infrastructure. You have capacity building. So what does it mean to best support your chapters, and how do you offer it from HQ? You need global alignment. So if you're a global organization, maybe you're just in the US, so you need alignment across strategic plans, and write this one down and circle it, affiliation agreements, okay? And you need those chapters to sign off. They need to re-affiliate, or however you're doing it, to what you guys are agreeing on are the services that HQ provides and the services that your chapters provide. This took 3 years for ACG, okay? 3 years. Now I'm sitting in New Jersey in an association's office. They were so kind to let me use it today because I'm not back in Detroit. And they had delivered me some information that it took them a little over 2 years to roll out a program to get all of their chapters off of separate bank accounts and all onto one national bank account that they had virtual access to. So these projects don't happen in a couple of months, but the investment into them are incredibly important when it comes to creating stronger chapters. So specifically outline responsibilities of the national and the chapters, okay? So do me a favor, if you are, and there's a good chance you're in here for this reason, if you're currently looking at, looking to, I should say, restructure your chapters, just type into the chat for us. We're going to send you a list of handouts, specifically ACG's list of member services and affiliation agreement. So just go ahead and type into that chat for us, and we'll make sure to do that. And I see my marketing team has actually already put a link in there for the recording that we did with Gary specifically on this example, okay? So we're going to dive into some meat here, but I wanted to show you, first and foremost, this is important, and we see it across the association space, and this is a growing trend, is our chapters needed? We see a lot of HQ staff ask, not you guys, the CRPs, the component relations professionals, you're trying to show why they matter, but your CIO or your ED, they might not get it, right? So ACG is a great example for them to see strong leadership can make a positive change, and when you get chapters rowing in the same direction, the organization thrives when you do it right, okay? So Tanya and some people are typing in that they want the handout, so my marketing team that's listening, please go send that to them, okay? All right, so how do you know if your chapter network is in trouble? I'm sure a lot of you have some answers on this one. But if warning signs are replicated across the chapter network, it's not just troubled with a few isolated chapters. We've talked quite a bit about a third, and a third, right? How many of you have a third of your chapters that just seem to be all-stars, right? Great volunteers, they know what they're doing, they have systems in place, they have some money, maybe they're big enough that they have some staff. Then there's the third of the chapters that are just kind of getting by. They're not doing anything bad, but it's not like they're high flyers. And then there's the last third that you beat your head against the wall. Probably 80% of your time is spent dealing with these bad chapters, right? So how many of you have that issue right now? And Megan and some other people are coming in, marketing team, that are asking for the handout. So please, people, if you want the handouts, just type into the questions for us, and we'll send those out, and just give us your email. So if changes that need to happen impact affiliation agreements and need specific accountability assigned to national chapters, okay? Now, I know this is the scary part, folks, that this is going to take bylaw changes and board approvals and you name it, right? But first and foremost, you need to define what that most impactful thing is going to be that you can do as a CRP. But once you figure that out, okay, once you figure out what's going to move it forward, you're right, it's not going to be a 3-month project, but the impact that it's going to make can be incredible. All right, so I've already asked this question, but if you haven't answered into the chat yet, let us know. Are you considering a restructure in the past year? We have a Dropbox folder built out of resources specific for this topic that are not Bill Highways. We've built these or compiled these from other associations that have given us materials that have worked for them in the past, including how to take it to your board and build a story. So send in, let us know if you are. We'll send you that Dropbox folder that's public so you guys can download those materials if it's something that you're considering, okay? Joanne, Megan, I don't know the first name, but it's T. Just type into the chat. So awesome, we'll get you those materials. All right, so we did a listicle here. So we got 10 warning signs that we're talking about. And of course, if you know Bill Highway and me, we're very corny here, so you'll have to excuse us, but that's why we got all of the construction signs up here. All right, so let's start getting into some of this stuff. And I'd be interested to learn if some of these problems we're talking about are unique to you, because we'd love to learn more and unpack those. Because if you change those, we'd love to learn from you to share it with the group, okay? So number one, national leaders are not involved at their chapters. I have heard this story a lot. How many of you have had an ED or a CEO have heard of one that hated the chapters? They had some visceral feeling towards the chapters, that they wanted to control everything, so they just did things without even asking the chapters. And I have seen organizations that the board, which was made up of chapter leaders, you know, funny how that works, have actually voted out to get rid of the CEO or ED because of that relationship. So this is the number one problem we're talking about. Chapter issues not being heard at a national level. National leaders are in this bubble. Now, you're what we call the conduit between the chapters, or whatever you call those components, sections or divisions, and then on the other side, you have HQ. And you're the one that has to connect the two. You have to take what's important for the chapters, what's important at HQ, and find what crosses over. And in the middle is where you live, okay? But if you're not explaining to national what's important at the chapter level, and at the national level, if you're not distilling that down and helping the chapters understand what you're trying to get accomplished at HQ, there's going to be a big disconnect. So what are some of those causes? It's leadership pipeline not connected to chapters. There's no leadership development support from national. We've seen some really cool programs on the second point here where the national helps invest in scholarships to support and help professional development at the local level. And the chapter objectives are unknown. I've asked this question quite a bit, folks, so I know a lot of your answers are going to be you don't know what your chapter objectives are. That's the way it was. Let's make it not the way it's going to be, okay? Create what, there's a really great association that is working hard, the component relations professional and their IT team, they partnered up with their executive director and they created what they called a listening tour. And they went around and they met with all of the chapters to understand what those objectives are and created a survey, incentivized the chapters to fill out the survey so they knew what was important to their chapter leaders. I don't know how many of you have that kind of relationship, but that's one example that you could do to help you along. So specific to this problem, what could be some next steps? So a takeaway, our national leaders should strive to stay in touch with chapter members to spot trends, issues, challenges as they arise, provide support to leadership development programs, create that connection, and help them solve their problems. The more you do that, the more that HQ is going to get out of it. If you're taking notes, which I know a lot of you do, write this down and circle it and then star it. And it's give first, right? So give first. If you're at the HQ level, give first to the chapters, and then you will receive the value that you're looking for. But you know they're not going to just listen to what you say. If you're in this webinar, you're looking at, you know, could I do a chapter restructure? You need to give first in these relationships. All right, number two, no chapter representation in the national governance. How many of you, raise your hand or type into the chat, don't have any chapter representation in the national governments? Again, the chapter issues are not being heard at the national level. Now, this might be for a different reason. The first reason could have been a very ignorant executive director or CEO. I can say that because I've seen it. I'm not advocating that that's how you word it, but I'm gonna just talk on your level because I know how frustrated many of you are with this. But the second problem is, what if there's no representation at the national governance, right? So the cause is, we're talking about an oversight on national's part, not valuing the relationship and valuing chapters that they bring, or maybe the number one intentional decision by chapters not valuing the relationship. So maybe it's intentional. Maybe it's chapters and national have differences in their opinions about each other's purpose. How many of you have that, right? How many are you competing with your chapters? The lack of communication or lack of opportunities for collaboration, which just increases the trust issues. So we've seen one growing project that I want to share with you that is online communities for your chapter leaders, all right? So you actually can build online communities where your chapter leaders can come in, not only collaborate with HQ and ask questions and ask for support, but also collaborate with each other. Now, it's not something that you can just build and they will come. You need to foster that network. You need to foster that community for it to be very impactful to the organization. But we've seen it work in absolute droves, and it can be incredible for an organization. So what are next steps to solve this problem? So one of the takeaways we wanted to share with you is to establish a chapter leader advisory group. If you don't have a group that you're meeting with, I would say at least on a monthly basis. It doesn't have to be all the chapters. Get what we call the early adopters in there, the ones that get it, the ones that are willing to invest the time to solve problems. And they can provide the input on just ask the question, how do we repair this relationship? How do we restructure the network so we all can grow more, we all can start rowing in the same direction, and we can build better trust, communication, and opportunity for collaboration. I'm going to call out somebody here because he's kind of a pinnacle of this, is Patrick Elgire at the Global Business Travel Association. So him and I have been very lucky to become actually friends with him. He was a chapter leader at GBTA and then actually took over the component relations role. So he runs the chapter relations there. And he had to rebuild those relationships and that trust, and he has. And that's why now they have more and more collaborative projects between the chapters and they have chapters and affiliates and HQ, okay? But you really need to establish an advisory board to understand and listen first, right? To be able to start figuring out ways you can do that. All right, we're rocking and rolling through this. So we're on number 3. So chapters have troubles recruiting volunteer leaders. I can say that unless your chapters all have staff, this is a problem, right? If I'm wrong, type into the chat, because we have seen this 100% across the board. That there's vacant leadership positions. Members are holding multiple positions at once, and you're recycling leaders, right? So we just learned at one of our roundtables in DC last week or the week before, we met an association that had built an incredible program over the last 12 months that solved this problem, right? Maybe you have volunteers that are waiting in the wings or have indicated they want to become a volunteer, but you don't have a position for them. And then you have other chapters that it's harder than heck to find anybody to pick up where they left off. A joke we hear often is, whoever doesn't show up to the meeting becomes the treasurer, right? Because nobody wants to be the treasurer. And so some of the causes is there's no chapter leadership pipeline, okay? What tools at HQ are you providing to help your chapter build a pipeline of volunteers? There's no leadership development support. What tools are you giving them to become better volunteers, to run the organization the way you want it ran? Undesirable chapter positions like we talked about, because the menial tasks that will exist when somebody's a treasurer. And then just overall, there's no chapter support from HQ. And this is a big one, folks. If you have excessive administrative responsibilities at the chapter level, you need to take care of that. Now you might be saying, Kyle, how do we do that from HQ? Define that you need to solve it and it's a big problem, and then go talk to that advisory group of chapters. Ask them, what do they absolutely loathe doing when they're a chapter treasurer? Or what other administrative responsibilities, from reconciliation of the bank and reconciliation of the membership database, reporting up to HQ, what are the biggest pain points? I'm not talking about a headache. I'm talking what are the migraines that they have that if it didn't exist, it'd be so much easier to fill that position. Okay? How many of you truly know that and have a good pulse on it? How many? So next steps, right, is think through what you can do to better support your chapters. Do they need tools? Do they need better technology? Do they need coaching and mentoring? Create that listening tour, right? Create that working group, that advisory group of chapters to identify those gaps. If you can identify those gaps, then we can start quantifying what the differences will be when we actually roll something out, okay? And I'm saying you roll something out, because you want to start small and then roll it out to the broader group when you do this. But you need to be very intimate with what those gaps are. So if you're sitting there going, I have no idea, that's okay. Write that down and circle it. That's what you need to do. Starting next week is the second calendar year quarter, right? So we got a fresh start. It's time to start putting emphasis on understanding those gaps. All right, how many of you have this problem? Aging chapter membership. So the problem here is aging chapter membership in leadership and difficulty in attracting younger members. Now, I was making a mistake when we started doing these webinars 6 months ago. I kept calling the younger members millennials. What I've learned in the last 6 months, talking to over 100 associations, sometimes it's just getting 70-year-old member on average age membership, and you want 40-year-olds, right? So it's just about getting a generational shift in not only your membership, but also in the volunteer leadership at your chapters. So what are some of the causes? I love the graphic here. So leadership is out of touch with the younger generation, okay? Marketing is not reaching that demographic. Whether it's, the millennials or whether it's just a different generation, the marketing that you were doing is no longer relevant. And we need to understand what those shifts are. Old tools, not mobile friendly, not targeted audience, things like that. And then membership costs might be too high or lack of installments available. So we've seen a lot of really great programs that offer an introductory membership for either college students or young professionals under a certain age. Or there's different ways of quantifying that. And then what we do to tie, we've seen great associations do to tie both groups together. The older generation of your membership, they typically love to be mentors to the younger generation if there's a true value add in that relationship. So are you creating mentorship programs? If that's something you're also interested in, let us know. We have a couple of associations that have shared their programs with us that are doing phenomenal. And that's something that we're seeing as a growing trend as well, to bridge those two gaps. So next steps for this problem, restructure how finances and resources are managed and allocated for member flexibility. Free up the chapter leaders to focus on younger generations. This is important, and you might have heard me say this in the last webinar. The foundation for success of your relationship with your chapters is the money, okay? And if sharing money is hard, or you have separate memberships and they got to go to 2 different websites, the HQ and the chapter to sign up, or if rebating money to the chapters is really hard in menial, if the chapters are sending you money and that's taking forever and you never know if they're lying about how many members they're paying for, there's a problem, okay? And that is a foundational step to take to improve the relationship with your chapters. All right, number 5, poor digital membership experience, okay? So the problem is lack of administrative infrastructure to support good line experiences for members and prospects. Now, the grass is always greener, right, on the other side, all right? But how many of you wish you had a better digital membership experience, okay? Now, and here's the second part of that question is, how many of you have a pretty good one at HQ, but all of your chapters are off on their own and doing their own thing? So the branding of your organization and association is weak, because if I go to the Detroit chapter, what I see there, I'm kind of turned off. Now, I don't know the difference between the Detroit chapter and HQ. You know that. You know the member doesn't truly understand all the time the differences between the two. especially if I'm going to the chapter and learning about the organization. All right? Awesome. So let's talk about the digital experience. So insufficient attention and or investment in technology. Now, here's something, you can answer this if you want to, but we see as a problem is how many of you have some kind of innovation or technology project or technology initiative even on your national or HQ strategic objectives, okay? Now, how many staff do you have that are in the IT or development department? Because typically we'll find very few compared to what it should be at the size of the organizations that your associations are. So that's where the insufficient attention comes in. And a lot of times it's at the director level. So you don't even have somebody at the executive level, like a CIO or a CTO, that are there to guide the strategic investment into technology. Because technology is in every facet of the business. So let's talk through a couple of those, right? And again, we're looking at this in the lens that you can take this slide as a tool and go present it to your, ED saying, see, I told you, we're not the only ones with this problem, but we need to solve it. So your first one is your website. Not updated, it's not responsive, maybe it's not optimized for search. There's email marketing, so poor visibility, no segmented lists or targeted prospects. How many of you out there might have a really good AMS, but then all of your chapters are on Excel spreadsheets and checkbooks, right? And you're not able to email all of your members directly because it has to go through the chapters. That's a problem. Registration, still using paper forms, or what other barriers are created because the chapters aren't provided better tools for registration. The database, how many of you are having problems with chapters reporting either member data or financial data? How many of you get it once a year? I see that a lot, or even once a quarter. It's 2017. We can get this in real time to give your membership team at HQ the data they need to grow membership. All right, next steps. So the takeaway here is national needs to, you've got to find a way to get national on board of doing this. That's the challenge I give you, is how can they play a larger role in supporting the investment in technology for your chapters? How do you give them technology and to create it into a revenue stream? This is something we're seeing more and more of. It's kind of like the franchise model. And then ask how national can support the digital member experiences across the board. So at the chapter level and the national level, okay? Let's make sure the member experience is pristine no matter what touch point they have. All right, number 6. And how are we doing out there? We're halfway through. I see a ton of questions coming in. So I want to make sure that I'm reading through these. And we'll get to allotments at the end. So chapters are slow in submitting reports, money, and data. Gosh, I don't know. I don't know of an association that doesn't have some level of challenge with this, okay? So the problem is everything takes way too long, whether it's dues processing or sending member data info, or how about this? Maybe you collect the dues up at national, but maybe a key activity for you are events, which is obviously it's very logical that should, is going to exist a lot at that local level. Well, how many of you have the engagement metrics from your local leaders? We've been really talking to you guys a lot about the difference between lagging KPIs and leading KPIs, so key performance indicators. How many of you know that engagement data, that's a leading indicator that if you can get that up, the money will follow. Money does not lead, money follows. So you're going to present this to your ED, you need to show them that, hey, give me the leash, give me some leash to go test this out with a couple of chapters, where if we provided them event software and they used it, we now have the data on that. They're going to keep the majority of the money, but maybe we take 2% of all of the event registration fees. So it's a revenue stream for national, but now you have the key engagement data, if that's what it is for your organization. So some of the causes are lack of chapter volunteer knowledge or capacity. Look, we work with a lot of associations that they're in the construction trade. They don't know about event registration software, or they're in the advertising space where they don't know a lot about finance, right? What tools are you providing them to supplement and complement what they're good at and taking off what they're not. The lack of tools available to chapter volunteers, okay? I think we're all pretty familiar with that. So here's your takeaway. Ask how National can reduce that burden on chapter staff and volunteers. Determine, how many of you know what data is critical, right? I'm not talking about membership growth and retention. We all know that's important. But how many of you actually know what data is critical? How many of you know, and you might say, well, Kyle, my key activity or our organization's key activity is education. Great. How do you measure that at the local level? Because if you're saying, well, we only do it at national because we can't at the chapters, you just identified a huge opportunity to grow your organization. Do you recognize that? All right? So whatever that key activity is, and then who is accountable for the different aspects of the financial and data processes. Because if you put the burden on the chapters, you're going to set them up for failure. All right? Okay. I'm stepping down from my soapbox now. All right, number 7, declining chapter membership. So the problem is declining chapter membership and higher membership growth in at-large national memberships rather than chapter memberships, okay? So what we're seeing here are poor recruitment practices at your chapters. And again, you probably have some that are doing it great, but if they are, why can't we get the other, we call it the bottom third of the chapters, doing the same thing? Okay, what are those variables or inputs that make them a bad chapter versus the other one a good one? All right. Okay, so I got a question in here that I'm seeing. So what is a better way to share membership lists between national and chapters? Right now, we just export the list to Excel and send it to them. So the way, a better way of doing this is, and if you can answer, into the chat for me, what national database do you have? What AMS? Because what you can do is a couple of things. One is some of the AMSs have the ability for you to allow your chapters to log in just for reporting. But I recommend looking into additional services where you can provide functionality even better than that at the chapter level. So an example is a company like MemberZone or ChapterSpot, where they have the functionality at the chapter level that can tie into the national database. That's one way you can have real-time data back and forth, okay? Because there's a difference between getting the data once during the join, but what if the member updates contact information, 3 days later, or updates their phone number? How do you sync up those databases? Because that becomes really messy. So going back to the slide here, if you're looking at the presentation, we're talking about the causes, perceived lack of chapter value. This one right here is your responsibility to start taking the information and a lot of the education we're providing you to tell a better story to national, to expose them to other associations that flipped the script and said, no, we're not looking at chapters as a burden, we're going to look at them as an investment and it's going to pay off. When you can show that story, your association will grow. So next steps and takeaways on this one, reevaluate the value you're presenting to prospective and existing members. Look, at the end of the day, this is all a product that's being sold to the members, all right? There was a great blog on Association Now Today that was talking about the negative connotation of the word sales. But that's what you're doing. And what you need to do is set up your chapters to sell better, okay? And that is providing better value to members. And that value absolutely evolves. What the value was 10, 20 years ago does not mean that's what the value you're going to be providing tomorrow. And that is something that HQ needs to lead the charge on. Number 8, declining non-dues revenue. So problems for guys, there's less funds to support operations and programming. What are some of these causes? So if leadership is not offering and or does not have time to plan on focus for providing value in programming. We met a really great association at our roundtable. I think this one was in Alexandria last week, that their core or one of their key activities was education. And they got to a point where they did an incredible thing. They built out an entire educational program and gave it to the chapters. So now the members all had a very consistent and high quality program of education that the chapters could then provide and didn't have to all build it themselves. That was a key activity for that association. So how is leadership investing into those chapters? Number one, so decline in participation of chapter events. Again, if you're not measuring this stuff, you got to figure out a way to get it done. And you can do that through investing in technology like event technology to then give to the chapters and then take a cut of that revenue. So now you can have the data so you can see a leading indicator. If you see at a chapter that participation in events is on a gradual decline or drops below a red flag threshold that you set, it gives you the ability to get in front of it before the revenues really start to take a hit. All right. Number two, decrease in revenue from sponsors, exhibitors, and advertisers at events. We're going to talk about solutions here, but I've seen some associations do incredible things where they created a centralized CRM of sponsors so that the chapters could access that and leverage the sponsorship packets from national to sell to the sponsors at the local event level. Okay. Very, very powerful. Or maybe the national sells a package for the annual big conference, but then also a part of that is some of, they get 30 chapter conferences, right? Or chapter events that they get certain branding on, that you get a cut of the revenue at the chapter level. Number three, lack of value for members and potential sponsors and exhibitors. Okay, so some of the causes we're talking about. So dive in here. All right, ask the difficult questions and don't avoid constructive conflicts. The chapters that are vocal, I know sometimes they're the Debbie Downers, and I'm sorry if we have any Debbies in here, but seek to understand what their problems are. Evaluate what those perceived value gaps are between national and chapters. That 100% is your job as a CRP. Number 9, fewer programs and events are being offered, okay? So the problem is if you're unable to find content, we see a lot of chapters that can't keep a healthy pipeline of presenters or speakers. So what are some of these causes? Maybe they can't afford to put on the same number of events. Expenses are not covered by registrations and sponsorships, right? They're all volunteers. They don't have enough time to sell. If they did, they could get more sponsors to cover these things, but as it is right now, they don't. Leaders are too absent or too busy to focus on programming. Look, if you're dealing with volunteers, they're too busy. That's just the way it is. So everything you can do to make their lives easier, you're going to be able to not only help the ones you have, but you're going to be able to attract better volunteers in the future. And then the lack of guidance or templates for events and program management. So how many out there are throwing events as a main or key activity? That is something that your members have said that is a big value to them. And if you don't know that answer, I need you to write something down. You need to survey the members or find a way to survey the members to figure out what those core value props are. Okay? And if one of them is events, are you providing, so maybe you don't have the technology yet, but the first step is to provide them a template. Give them a series of emails that they can send out to members and prospective members to attract them to the event, okay? Give them the process, at least, of what technology to use and teach them how to do it. How many of you are giving that guidance? And the best part is don't recreate the wheel. Go find other chapters that are crushing it at events and just take what they're doing and share it with everybody. So next steps that I'm kind of talking about is first and foremost investigating that. Where can you increase value and participation? And then evaluate how processes can be standardized or relieved from the chapters. Goodness gracious, get them standardized. But if you're able, right, is getting an investment and helping actually provide some of these tools. Those are the strongest associations we see that have chapters, okay, are the ones that are investing into that stuff. And number 10, and the last one here is low satisfaction ratings among chapter members and events. I'd be curious how many of you actually have this data. And I'm not talking about your annual conference. I'm asking how many of you know the satisfaction ratings among chapter members and events at the chapter level, okay? If you don't, figure that out, guys, because this is a good step to creating a project, again, if that is a key activity. So the problem is survey says, survey says, chapter experience is why members don't renew. Quick sidebar, I was up till like 3 in the morning the other night watching Family Feud with Steve Harvey. It's fantastic. I haven't seen him yet, so it's pretty funny. So what are some of these causes? Members don't see the value, right? And this is, let's go back to that a third example. If a third of your chapters are doing really great, and maybe you see a correlation as their events are doing really well, how are they doing that? And your other chapters that are underperforming, how do we get that on the same page so the members see the value? Maybe that's the way they're marketing. Maybe it's the speakers they're bringing in. Maybe it's the time of day they're throwing these things. Maybe it's a luncheon versus a dinner. What are the common best practices? And how do you provide that information to all your chapters? It's not there, or it's not being marketed well, obviously. So staff leaders don't have association management expertise. They need help. These people are volunteers. They are industry members that believe in the mission and the impact. They got involved. And again, I know some of your bigger chapters have staff too, but it's the same thing. And then a lot of times, I'm not even going to say sometimes, chapter and staff leaders don't understand what their responsibility is. Now, if you're sitting there screaming at the screen going, Kyle, we told them, I want you to understand something. There is a difference between telling something to somebody and them actually hearing it and understanding, okay? There's a very big difference, and if you keep telling them and the common constant is that they keep not doing it, then the problem is probably what you're telling them or how you're telling them to find a better way to get it to resonate. So next steps is evaluate accountability and allocate specific complementary responsibilities to national and chapters, okay? Let's get some questions here real quick. We're sitting here at 12:43. We've been trying to finish these in 45 minutes based on some feedback we're getting from members. So is that helpful? We have a ton of activity in the question box here right now. I want to make sure that we get that all, or maybe better yet, where are you at right now and what do you need help with, okay? As we're getting some of those into the question box, one thing that I'll share that we have officially started doing, we were testing something out, and that was you all were giving us feedback saying, man, it'd be great to just meet each other, because as CRPs, we never have the opportunity to network. So we said, okay, great, we'll start throwing some roundtables. So now we had some guinea pigs and we did this. And what we are doing is now holding a roundtable once a month in these 4 different cities. So DC, Alexandria, Reston, and Chicago. So we're going to get some consistency to this coming up in the future, where hopefully it'll be the same day of the month or the same week or something like that. But for right now, here's the ones upcoming in April for you all. They're only open to 10 people at a time, because we find that if we add more than 10, it's really hard to have a good conversation. And these are just about getting together and sharing stories and sharing resources, okay? Again, you'll not be sold by Bill Highway. We're just facilitating this because you asked us to. And we've been having a lot of fun doing these, okay? All right, let's see what I say. So let's get to some Q&A. If there's anything else that you guys need. So there's a lot of people asking for the resources that we talked about. We will make sure to get those out to you, okay? I see some people put in their AMSs as Netform and Abilla. We have Aptify. We have IMIS, a couple like that. That's great. Often what we see is if they don't extend down to the chapter level, there's often this disconnect, and that was the database problem that we talked about, okay? So Jolene, is it Jolene? I'm terrible with names pronunciation. I hope I got that right. So we'll send you some information on mentorships. There's a couple of associations that we'll talk to you about offline that they've built some incredible mentorship programs that we would love to connect you with, and they've given us permission to. All right, let's see what else we got. We see a lot actually going on considering a restructure. That's awesome. One resource that we didn't mention, if you are considering a restructure, this is one area we don't always recommend that you go out and get a consultant, okay? This is one area that we do. And there is one specific organization, and I'm sure a lot of you know of them because they are the foregone experts on the stuff, and that's Peter and Peggy over at Mariner Management. How many of you heard of, are familiar with Peter and Peggy? I see a lot of names in here that are. They're incredible folks. Just take a call with them if you're considering chapter restructuring as a project. They go as far as to the board meetings with you to help you guys do this. And more importantly, they've gone through or have conducted a lot of chapter restructures at associations over the years. So they have case studies built out on this stuff, folks. So go to their, Google them and find their blog, and you'll see the archive of some of those examples. I think one was the Dental Education Association or something like that. And there's plenty more on there. So they work with a lot, dozens and dozens and dozens of associations with chapters. When it comes to you, they are the experts. They truly are. So I see a lot of people coming in. Tanya just said love them. A lot of people that do know them, they're fantastic. So Julene, I think you asked another question here, and it says we are a small association and we really need someone to manage our chapter relations. How do we get buy-in for a staff person to support this? This is a great question. So Julene, what I'd ask is, right now, what structure are you? Meaning, are your chapters federated? Are they centrally controlled? Do they collect the funds, or do you collect the funds? And if you can answer some of those questions for me, the reason I'm asking is we'll send you some data. So my marketing team on here, we'll send you an example of, so Dresden Farrand, who we did a webinar with, she was in a similar organization, didn't really have chapter relations staff, and she was charged with growing membership through chapters. And she has some proven out metrics of the activities that she did and what the results were. And she increased revenue by a lot, both on the membership numbers as well as events, but then also on things like sponsorship revenue. She brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars into the organization by leveraging the chapters, okay? And so that's one way. If you showed that, how could you test that? Maybe contract somebody out, or get contract out like an association management company that could help you with that. And then if that works, then you can go in and actually get a full-time hire or something like that. So you said we collect their dues for them. They are not formally affiliated. Some have paid administrators, some don't. They do share the database, so that's good. So if you got the data, then it's a lot easier to measure things that you try out, okay? So what I would ask is, do you have some of your chapters that are doing really well? You can measure them on their impact to growth. They have better retention than everybody else. Can we extrapolate what they are doing, right? Interview them, figure out why it is that way for them, and if we can get that to other chapters, we can grow the overall pot of revenue or money here, which would call or allow for a chapter relations hire. Now also think about it again in small increments. Can you engage with an AMC or maybe a consultant to help run some of that for you? I know Peter and Peggy also do some AMC stuff where they can manage it and then you could actually invest into a full-time hire. Julie, that I would recommend. So Clarence asked virtual chapters, is this a viable option for structure? Clarence, it absolutely is. And if people are familiar with virtual chapters, there's different levels of what a component can be. It could be a full-blown chapter where they're hosting events. They have their own membership dues, and there's some kind of relationship with that and money with national. Or maybe they're also offering education, again, going back to your key activity. But let's say there's areas of the country that it's more of just like a meetup, right? It doesn't have that same flavor, and it doesn't warrant for a full chapter structure. What you can do is a virtual chapter there, right? And you can even start in areas where you're trying to grow chapters, start with virtual chapters. If that grows past a certain amount of like maybe 100 members or 50 members, then they can apply to be a chapter. So virtual chapters are absolutely an opportunity. We also see that a lot overseas, okay? So you guys can offer your educational services, let's say, overseas, if that makes sense. for your association? So Clarence, that's a great question. I'm sure we have some material on virtual chapters that we'd love to share, and we'll get you some stories on that. So thanks for that question. All right. It looks like a lot of these questions were either duplicates or we're asking for the handout. So that is going to be it for us today. If there's anything else, please do let us know. We also have someone else coming in asking for the material on virtual chapters, so we'll get that to you as well, okay? So anyway, thank you all for attending. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces and always meeting some new ones. Again, if you're in these areas, in the DC area, the week of the 18th, or in Chicago, the week of, or on Tuesday, April 25th, come register to come to one of these roundtables. We feed you. We'll tell you some very corny jokes to just lighten your day up, but then also you have an opportunity to network with all these other CRPs that you guys can share best practices together. That's what it's all about. We just dive into those topics. You know, we're networking, sharing cards. It's great for career development for you all. And again, you get CAE credits for this if you are a CAE, okay? If that is it, I hope everybody had a great day. Oh, it looks like some people are saying excellent presentation and thank you. We appreciate it. We really do appreciate all of you. And so many of you that we've gotten known over the past, or know over the past several months, really appreciate the relationships. It's been awesome building this with all of you. We'll be back again in 2 weeks, but also with these roundtables. Hope to see you in face, if not virtually again. And we'll also be at MMNC in May if you all are attending there too, okay? Besides that, have an incredible rest of your day into Friday. Hopefully the weather is getting better where you're at because we're in spring, and have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.